Of all the films that Pixar have cultivated into franchises, which I don't think I need to tell you is a lot of them at this point, Cars has been by far one of the most expansive. Sequels, spin-offs, video games, way too many short films to count, and seemingly more toys than the franchise literally about the damn things. I can't inherently fault them for it. Once you find something that's popular, you make the most out of it. Something that I wouldn't know anything about. If this video doesn't get a lot of views, that comment is going to be really embarrassing. But in a franchise as expansive as this, some projects are inevitably going to attract more attention, while others garner the illustrious reputation of, oh yeah, I think I watched that a few years ago, it was probably alright. And one installment that kind of just came and went was actually a whole-ass TV series from 2022 titled Cars on the Road. The premise of the show is honestly pretty loose, with every episode being a more or less self-contained comedy sketch. Lightning McQueen and Mater go on a road trip together across the country and making a series of Pete stops along the way to Mater's sister's wedding.
Everybody, this is my dear sister, Mato.
Like tomato without the tub?
Okay, that's actually pretty good. The overarching narrative is pretty minor and basically just an excuse to put McQueen and Mater in a bunch of wacky scenarios along the way, pretty much like the other Million Cars shorts that came before it. It's an approach that has its advantages. For one, since the story is pretty minimal and the focus is on all the crazy situations that McQueen and Mater get into, the show isn't restricted to the more grounded and introspective approach that the movies went in, and instead focus on some more slightly surreal elements. I mean, in the first few episodes, we see that the Cars universe canonically contains car dinosaurs, car ghosts, and car angels. And even the more down-to-earth episodes have these characters taking on scenarios that the movies never really had an opportunity to tackle, what with all the focus on racing. Instead, we get elements like a circus, the set of a horror movie, and a song and dance number.
It's a truck thing!
It's a nice bit of variety that ensures that you're not stuck with the same idea or setting for too long, and that we get to see these characters in scenarios that we've never seen them in before. Although, considering the franchise we're talking about, that might seem like a strange thing to praise, what with Cars 2 previously going in a radically different direction and becoming a blight on Pixar's reputation for its troubles. I think the main difference is that in Cars 2, you were supposed to be invested in the story. It was a direct continuation of the original film's plot that completely abandoned the themes of it for an unrelated spy story. Not only was it not what people wanted from this story continuing, but it was also a mess of a story in its own right.
But you know I'm just a tow truck, right?
Right, and I'm just in the import-export business.
Cars on the Road, however, is as deliberately inconsequential as possible, so it can get away with being a bit weirder. If anything, it actually kind of deepens these characters by showing that their lives don't just revolve around racing and showing that they do have downtime and other interests. I actually think the spy angle of Cars 2 wouldn't have been so bad if they presented it as a little short film like these and it didn't take itself so ridiculously seriously. I wouldn't even be opposed to them doing it now. What if, say, McQueen and Mater in one episode just happened to stumble across Finn McMissile and Holly Shiftwell on an undercover mission which they find themselves stuck in the middle of? If it was done well, then it could have been a decent redemption for Cars 2 by making it what it arguably should have been to begin with, just a small side story that's separate from the main series. Hell, I'll say it, Cars 2 had some decent elements that could have been worth adapting. The action scenes were fairly decent and had an unironically great musical score. If you just had Lightning and Mater doing stuff like this for 8 minutes, it could be a potentially decent episode, provided it was funny. I mean, if Cruz Ramirez from Cars 3 can make an appearance, why not go all the way with it? Speaking of the comedy though, it's something that I think is worth discussing because there are some good ideas here. For example, there's one episode where McQueen and Mater get into an argument on the road, as you often see in buddy road trip movies like this.
We'll argue about something dumb, fight and break up, only to come back together when we realize neither could do it without the other.
That could end up feeling cliche, but they take it in a pretty unique direction by having them get caught in the middle of this all-out war between these two camps of Mad Max-style cars. And what ends up putting McQueen and Mater's argument into perspective for them is finding out that these two camps used to get along before getting into their own little tiff that spiraled way out of control. That's actually pretty funny. Conceptually. In execution, the explanation for what happened between these two factions is just glanced over.
It's all a bit murky now. You don't even remember what you're fighting about?
That's also a potentially funny idea, but after half an episode of build-up, the actual action scene is over in less than a minute. So if the reason for why they're fighting isn't elaborated on, and the action scene itself isn't given any real attention, to quote McQueen himself,
"Where's the entertainment in that?"
And that's kind of the main problem with the show as a whole. A lot of these episodes are funny in concept and they're enjoyable enough for what they are, but they don't really do a lot more than what's expected of them. There's an episode where they spend the night in a haunted house and all that really happens is McQueen gets chased down some hallways for a few minutes. The episode of The Circus shows McQueen being scared of clowns, which for a setting like this is probably the most overused comedic trope they could have gone with. The musical number in episode 6 is kinda catchy, although the melody doesn't really progress or evolve throughout the song. The trippy neon visuals are kinda cool, but the animation has no sense of speed or energy, and it doesn't mesh well with the upbeat party atmosphere the song is going for. Really, a lot of your enjoyment of the show will boil down to how much you enjoy McQueen and Mater's dynamic. If you're not a fan of them, the show is not gonna do anything to change your mind. If you do like these two, however, then chances are you'll be fine with it. Again, it's pretty much the standard routine between these two that we've been seeing since 2006. It's nice that they got Owen Wilson and Larry the Cable Guy back to do the voices, but there isn't a ton to their interactions that you haven't seen before. And much like the movies, aside from a couple of gags here and there isn't really a whole lot done with the concept of these characters being cars. In fact, in one case, it actually starts to get a little bit confusing. So there's one character named Ivy who shows up for a few episodes. She's a monster truck who has a past of performing at rallies doing what monster trucks are designed to do. And it's a backstory that doesn't really get shown in any considerable detail because presumably Pixar realized this doesn't make any sense.
They expected one thing from me.
Did she kill them? I don't know. They don't show anything other than Ivy jumping on them and presumably either killing or seriously injuring them. And this is apparently something that's not only legal in the Cars universe, but also popular. And while there are a couple jokes throughout the show about the characters being cars, there still aren't really that many of them. With everything I've said so far, it begs the question, did I actually like Cars on the Road? Well, let me put it this way. When the trailer first came out, my initial impression was, oh, okay, looks decent. And upon watching it, I was pretty much on the money. It's nothing amazing compared to the original film, which I still have my issues with, but I admit had some excellent moments. But to Cars on the Road's credit, it's also the only somewhat narrative-driven Cars product since the first movie that I would say is actually worth a damn. If you like Cars and you're not in a particularly demanding mood, which, depending on who you ask, might be a bit redundant, you'll likely get your fill. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters Heather Reed, Zelda, Moon Goddesses, Blueberry Cello, Seth M, Chris Spicer, and Jacob K. Thank you so much for the support. If you'd like to see your name in the credits, along with early access to scripts and videos, as well as exclusive unused video thumbnails, or if you'd just like to chat with me, consider supporting me on Patreon for just $1.50 a month. The link is in the description.